Hey guys, Greg from CarID.com and welcome to the shop. Today we are working on our Project F150, and if you've been following us on Facebook and YouTube, you know that we have already done a few slight modifications to it. At this stage of the build, it's time to get serious. So the plan is to take this project truck to a whole other level, literally. This factory suspension, it's gotta go. Hey, Richard, how are you?
Hey, Greg, how are you?
Good.
Did I hear you correctly? You want to rip the suspension out?
Listen, Richard, Ford did an amazing job with this new aluminum body F-150, but the ride height is just a little too low for my taste.
Okay, you have a good point. So fill me in. What do you have planned?
Come on, I'll show you. All right, this is the plan. Getting this Pro Comp 6-inch lift kit bolted up to our truck and top it all off with some mean-looking 35-inch mud terrain tires.
Well, you're not kidding about getting serious. This is really going to transform the look of our truck.
The team at ProComp really hooked us up. These guys definitely know what they're doing and have been specializing in performance suspensions since '92. This is their 6-inch lift kit for 15 and up Ford F-150 four-wheel drive trucks. Just by looking at these parts, you can see the quality. Not only are these parts built to last and durable enough to handle the toughest environments, but this kit is extensive, giving us everything we need for a smooth installation.
And you're certainly right about that. From the heavy-duty cross members to the steering knuckles to the brake cable relocation brackets, I think we've got everything that we need.
I've already inventoried all the parts that we received with the parts list on the installation instructions, and we have a complete kit.
What are we waiting for?
Come on, let's turn some wrenches. I'm putting you to work.
What the hell did I get myself into?
All right, before we can install any of our new lift kit parts, we need to disassemble the entire front suspension. This is going to include our braking system, spindle, strut assembly, tie rod end, sway bar, and the lower control arm. We're gonna go ahead and do that now. It's important that before removing the factory knuckle, that the braking backing plate is removed so you can access the ABS wheel speed sensor. Next, remove the axle nut, tie rod end, sway bar end link, unbolt the 3 bolts holding the vacuum actuator to the knuckle, the lower ball joint nut and the upper ball joint, lower strut bolts, upper strut bolts, and last, the lower control arm. You can then remove the sway bar from the vehicle completely.
Thank you, Greg, for getting this entire front suspension completely removed on our Project F-150. We're ready to move on to what is definitely the biggest part of this entire lift job, and that is removing the front differential. Before we do that, we need to disconnect the front drive shaft. We've already marked it. Be sure to mark its relative position so it goes back the same way to avoid vibration. We're going to remove that front cross member. We're ready to drop the entire front diff. Let's get started.
There are 3 bolts holding in the front differential to the vehicle. Using a breaker bar and a series of extensions, you'll be able to get them out. So as you can see in this portion, when dropping the front differential, it's definitely necessary to have an extra set of hands, or in our case, a set of post jacks, and if you have access to a hydraulic transmission jack. All right, now that we have our front differential removed from our truck, we can go ahead and start with cutting the driver's side control arm pocket off. Now, ProComp is very clear in their instructions to measure 2 11/16 from the top of the cam bolt hole and draw a horizontal line. We've went ahead and already done so. Now it's time to start cutting. In this portion, when cutting off the lower control arm pocket, use a suitable cutting wheel. We decided to use a cutoff wheel and a sawzall to make the necessary cuts.
Now that we've cut this lower control arm mounting bracket off as per the instructions, we used a polishing wheel just to smooth out our cutting surfaces. Next, In order to protect the bare metal, we're going to spray that with some black spray paint, and we'll be ready to move on to the installation of our front differential drop brackets.
All right, now that the hard part is done and our control arm pocket has been cut from our vehicle, we can now start installing some of the new parts from our kit. We're going to start with the differential drop brackets, get the differential back up into place, and then install our new rear crossmember. Reconnect the vent line using the extension provided with the kit. Once we have the new front and rear cross members in place, we're going to take the driver's side lower control arm and test fit it to make sure that the new control arm pockets line up correctly. All right, guys, now that we have both of our new cross members installed in our truck, it's time to install the brace for the rear cross member. Now, this will require some drilling. What ProComp and ourselves recommend is use the brace itself as a template to mark your holes before you start drilling. We're gonna go ahead and get this installed now. We're gonna go ahead and move on to installing the lower front skid plate that goes under the differential. And then after that, we're going to make sure that we go back and torque all of the differential and crossmember bolts before proceeding with our installation.
We are going to finish up the front end lift installation by reinstalling our drive shaft to the front differential and also reinstalling the stock sway bar. ProComp gives us this spacer for the drive shaft, and it's needed because of the lift. The lift created additional space between the drive shaft and the front diff, so we need the spacer to take up that additional space. Now, ProComp is also very clear about the fact that if you do any high-speed off-roading, you should not use the spacer. In that case, the recommendation is to take the drive shaft to a professional shop to have it lengthened. With that out of the way, let's get back to work and finish up our front-end lift install.
It is crucial when installing both the front and rear drive shaft spacers to use red thread locker on the bolts, as well as when you're done, torque them down to the appropriate spec. Now with the drive shaft in place and torqued down, we're going to go ahead and proceed with installing our front OEM sway bar. All right, guys, we are moving right along with the installation of our ProComp 6-inch lift kit. At this point, we're going to start reassembling the front suspension. Before we can do that, we need to swap some parts over from the original OEM spindles over to our new ProComp spindles. We're going to start by moving the wheel bearings over to our new ProComp spindles. After that, we're going to install the new strut spacers that came with our kit onto our factory OEM struts. Once that's done, we'll bring everything over to the front end and start rebuilding our front suspension. It's important to remember when removing the factory wheel bearings from the factory knuckles that you may need to use a hammer and a brass punch to loosen them from the knuckles themselves. In our case, our truck is relatively new. We didn't have to do so.
We are literally almost done with our front suspension build. We're going to take our existing struts with the spacers bolted to them. We're going to take our ProComp knuckles with the hubs transferred over to them. We're going to bolt them back up to the truck. Once we reinstall our brake components, the front end lift is done, and we're going to move to the rear.
When installing the new ProComp knuckles, we found it easier to first line up the lower ball joint into the pocket, as well as the axle through the hub before bolting up the upper control arm. Install the axle nut and torque to 17 foot-pounds, then the outer tie rod, wheel speed sensor, and finish up with the braking backing plate, rotor, and caliper. With the new knuckle installed, we can now install our brake line drop brackets. Don't be nervous to go ahead and bend the steel line slightly to have everything fit accordingly. When installing the new compression struts supplied with the kit, you need to press the bushings into the bars themselves. Now in doing so, we decided to use a little bit of silicone spray on the bushings to allow ease when pressing them. All right, guys, we're now going to get started on the rear of our truck. We are so close to getting this finished up and taking it out for a ride. In this portion, we're going to install ProComp's lift blocks, new shocks, and all of the relocation brackets for our emergency brake as well as our brake lines. Now, ProComp also provides block spacers as well as the lift block itself with the kit. Now, these spacers are used if you want the back end of the truck to be slightly higher than the front, not exactly level. I'm going to start by removing both shocks on either side of the rear differential. That way we can lower the axle one side at a time. Next, we can bolt the new e-brake and hydraulic brake line drop brackets. Once the factory U-bolts are removed, the lower axle can be lowered one side at a time and the new ProComp lift blocks installed. Now that the new lift blocks are in place, we can raise the differential and bolt up the new shocks on either side.
We have installed the rear blocks above the rear axle, as well as the new ProComp rear shocks. What's left to do? Not much. We've got to install this spacer on the rear drive shaft, put our wheels and tires back on, lower the vehicle, re-torque the suspension. Remember that some of the torque settings must be done with the vehicle weight on the ground. Send it out for an alignment, then we're going for a ride.
When bolting up the new rear drive shaft spacer, ensure that the transmission is in neutral so you can rotate the drive shaft to access the bolts. All right, guys, our lift kit installation is complete. We just finished up the back end of our truck, and we already went ahead back to the front and retorqued all of our bolts. Now, we have to top off the whole build with the right wheel and tire. Now, choosing the right wheel and tire can be difficult. However, we were lucky enough to get our hands on these. This is Asante's first ever off-road wheel, the only set in the country, and we're putting them on our truck. All right, Richard, it's done. What do you think?
I think we did a hell of a job, Greg.
Where? What do you mean we? I did all the work.
I helped.
Name one thing that you did.
I handed you the tools.
All right, fair enough. But back to the truck. Honestly, the team at ProComp really hooked us up with this lift kit. And topping it all off with these Asante wheels and tires, it really completes the whole look of the truck.
For once, I have to agree with you. This thing looks like king of the road. And again, all kidding aside, the install wasn't bad. What do you think was the trickiest part of the front end lift?
You know, probably the trickiest part was dropping that front diff. It wasn't so much tricky, just kind of clumsy getting the thing in and out. I would definitely recommend to whoever installs this, get an extra set of hands for that part.
My favorite part of the front end lift was watching you with the cutoff wheel. And wasn't the back end a piece of cake?
That was a piece of cake. Just lowering the rear differential, throwing those blocks in, a set of shocks, that took us no time.
So what's next for the truck?
I'm thinking we find some trails and take this thing wheeling.
I think you let me drive first.
All right, fine, you crazy old man. All right, guys, that wraps up our lift kit installation on our Ford F-150. I'm Greg.
And I'm Richard.
Subscribe to our Facebook and YouTube channels, and we'll see you next time for more product reviews and installation videos.